On CTV News, a prominent landscape architect with ideas for the rebuild and stress on men because of the earthquake. Welcome to CTV News. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. The Earthquake Commission has received more than 300,000 claims from the Canterbury earthquakes. Of those, 184,399 relate to the first event on September 4th. The rest, the subsequent quakes on October the 19th, November the 14th, Boxing Day, January the 20th and the 4th of February. But a further 118,041 claims have been received because of the devastating February the 22nd quake and the 5.3 magnitude aftershock on the 16th of April. EQC is receiving, on average, around 1,300 new claims daily and has paid out over $840 million in claims from people who have suffered damage to their land, homes and contents. Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee says this makes Canterbury's earthquakes by far the largest natural disaster the country has faced. The events in the past 7 months in Canterbury also rank as one of the biggest national disasters or natural disasters worldwide. Prior to the events in Japan last month, Hurricane Katrina was the world's costliest insurance event, generating around 600,000 claims. Nearly 7,000 full assessments have been completed by EQC since last March. In the meantime, a prominent landscape architect has plans for Christchurch's rebuild.
Landscape architect Di Lucas says the rebuild of Christchurch's CBD needs to be wary of waterways. Di is former president of the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects. She did an analysis for the Civic Trust 20 years ago and believes now is the time to reconsider this approach as Christchurch looks at its rebuilding options. She says the current city plan lacks design controls and measures to make the CBD sustainable, and the new design could allow for functioning natural systems. As whole street blocks have been mostly destroyed, she says their layout needs to be rethought to create more appealing urban spaces.
Well, specifically with the central city for a start, I think it's important that we recognise the original plan for Christchurch, the design for the Garden City, which is a model for the world. It's internationally recognised as a Garden City model. And so we need to think about that first, and that had the recognition of parks around, of green belts, the avenues, the grid and the waterways, the Avon corridor through it. So that's a start, along with the green spaces, squares.
Di says the landscape Christchurch was built on, which is plains with streams and rivers running through it, is one reason why so many buildings were damaged. She has reviewed 1850s maps of Christchurch, showing wetlands and streams through the city, and says she wasn't surprised there was so much damage. Liquefaction has occurred on areas with high water table and estuarine sands, and the existing and former natural levees along watercourses have exploded. She says these are a reminder that the underlying natural state of lands need to be considered carefully in the renewed city layouts. There were waterways under some of the majorly damaged buildings and areas in Christchurch, including the Pine Guild Guinness Building, St Luke's Church on Manchester Street, and the road on Manchester Street, which was badly damaged in the September earthquake, then sunk 1 metre in the February quake.
They need to be considered when you rebuild, because it's not the water in the stream so much that's been a problem. I mean, some of the stream banks seem to have exploded, and also probably there'd been fill put in waterways, and that's reacted differently, and with the quakes, and it's just how you manage it.
She also believes the rebuild of the CBD should only be up to tree height. Di believes lower height limits enable more people-friendly city environments.
In my opinion, it's good to use the trees, the canopy trees that line our rivers and parks that are about a 4-storey equivalent height, to have that as a sort of measure for buildings in the city.
Di believes these natural patterns must be looked at when redesigning, and believes this will also make Christchurch a more beautiful city to live in.
We also need to think about the natural patterns that underlie the city. There's the old waterways. There were a lot of springs, a lot of streams. It was plains. city, and so I think that whilst the Avon's been recognised, I think that it would be good to allow for the natural processes of the other waterways and the wetlands to be recognised through the city, and it can enrich the place. But we need good movement corridors for people, good lovely pedestrian promenades and walks on the rivers and streams, and good outdoor living areas, outdoor cafe, public and private spaces, and lots of cycle opportunities, but also some decent public transport to the city. So it operates as a hub in the greater city.
She says streams and wetlands in the CBD and the rest of the city were traditionally a focus for local iwi. Recognised archaeological sites are noted along the river corridors, including Victoria Square, the estuary and the coast.
According to some health professionals, men are their own worst enemies, and toughing it out is not the right thing to do.
While women take care of their health, men tend to shrug off any problems they have.
You've got the perception that men are invulnerable, and they want to maintain that, and it's to a certain degree it's the nature of the beast. However, studies have shown that, in fact, given the opportunity and the right circumstances, men actually are concerned about their health. If we consider the reasons why they don't do much about themselves, there's a number of potential reasons. There's the social environment. There's probably even more important is the opportunities, or the way the system is geared to provide opportunities for men to deal with their own health. And by that, what I mean is that the way the system is geared is we set up a medical centre, we sit here and we say, right, here we are, come to us, bring us your problems and we'll resolve them for you. Well, that's not how men work. That's never going to work for men. What we have to be doing, or what I see we have to be doing, is we need to be getting out there and advising them of the problem, identifying the potential areas of problem, and then helping them to access that system, rather than sitting here waiting for it all to come to us.
Bruce Yarwood says not dealing with stress in the early stages can bring problems later.
There's things like cardiovascular heart problems. You increase the risk enormously of those. One of the coping mechanisms that guys are using, and which we see here, are increasing alcohol intake. People have taken up smoking again. But what's not happening is they're not coming to us and saying, I have a problem, I'm stressed, therefore I'm drinking more and smoking more. We're identifying this by virtue of them coming for other reasons. So we're missing out a lot of what is potentially into the future developing major problems.
He says young men, those widowed and divorced men don't admit to having any problems.
The ones who actually do take some sort of action are usually the married guys, and I suspect that that's probably the partners looking after their welfare rather than the individual seeking out his own course of action.
He says it's time men got over their hunter-gatherer tough guy image and paid more attention to their health.
We pay more attention to women's health than we do to men's health. Yet men die younger, they have more suicides, they have more injuries, more accidents, and in fact there's more morbidity totally in men than there are in women. And yet here we are, the government and the systems will identify, will take care of the women, or provide more for the women than ever they are for the guys.
Bruce Yarwood says there are ways men can guard against future health problems.
Well, basically they've got to recognise the fact that it's okay to be stressed, to acknowledge the fact that you are under pressure, to acknowledge the fact that being under pressure and under stress is likely to lead to potential other difficulties, and that you need to resort to exterior agencies to try and resolve those difficulties before they become a major issue into the future.
After the break, it's surge issues in Canterbury. With lots of people disappearing out of Christchurch in the hope of finding somewhere safe and secure in the country, we take a look at rural property values.
I think there's a slight lift in the market. There's certainly more inquiry, we're finding in the Waimak and Huranui districts that we're getting a lot more calls from Christchurch people who've been shaken up with the earthquake, and they're coming up, but they're not actually, it's not turning into sales because they've got to sort out their finances and insurance and things in town before they do come. But overall, there's more inquiry, which is obviously going to lead to sales at the end of the day.
As long as they can move on their own properties.
Yes, well, they've got to have some finality on their own property. But in saying that, there's also a lot of people coming from out of town. We've had in the main rural scene, the farms, we're getting a lot more inquiry from the North Island at the moment. We've got several people coming down from the North Island. One or two of the big property companies are looking at buying sheep and beef farms, which hasn't been on the go for a while, as you know. But things are just starting to pick up, and I think we're going to look forward to a good year.
Interesting, you're standing in front of a tourist operation, so obviously it's not just farms anymore.
Oh no, look, it's across the board, and I think once things level out, particularly in the South Island here with this earthquake, things will be away again. And just with sheep and beef and the lifestyle, people are having a bit of a run. What's happened over the last 18 months? The lifestyle bare land blocks have sort of all been sold, and there's been nothing in it for the developers to develop new blocks. But I think that's going to start and change. It's going to be a definite spring for people to come out to the country where it's solid and safe, and hopefully, and it'll just carry on from there.
Got some iconic properties coming onto the market. There's one over there that looks pretty special.
Yes, there are a few. I'm not up with them all, Rob, but there's certainly a few coming on in North Canterbury and particularly down south. There's some big stations that the company have got coming on. So it's looking to be an exciting year, and we're starting to get some. We're starting to write some contracts on some of those. So it's all bodes well for the future.
Obviously, there's still immense pressure on the city's sewerage system, so what's happening at the other end of the pipe?
After the September one, we'd actually recovered quite well and had the plant up and running within about 6 to 8 weeks, and all was reasonably good. A few minor things to repair, but basically back. Unfortunately, when we had the February earthquake, that's now set us back, and not so much from wholesale damage to the plant, but just the amount of liquefaction, sand and silt that came through the wastewater system and eventually arrived at the plant. That was our biggest problem here. We also suffered, like many parts of the eastern suburbs, we suffered damage to some of the structures, including some of the roofs on top of the tanks here. But you can see a lot of them are already back on and back up and running. And we've got some problems and still have a few problems with some of the mechanical plant inside the tanks. The tanks have moved around and they're not quite circular or not quite as even as they were, and therefore we've got a lot of work going on repairing that plant.
Silt and liquefaction was a big problem at the wastewater plant.
Oh, it was absolutely immense, absolutely huge problem for us. We have normally 7 primary settlement tanks running, and we had to stop using all of them at one time because the sand was filling them up so quickly. So it was a question of having to bypass them for periods of time to give us some breathing space to actually get in and physically clean the sand and silt out. Yeah, well, what we have to do, we have to divert the plant down directly to the ponds, and we don't like doing that. We prefer not to, but in these particular extreme situations, that's all we can do.
It's a complex process at the wastewater plant.
Well, what happens through the whole process, really, the primary settlement tanks actually do the first sort of settling of the solids, and the solids are decanted off, and then the liquid that's left is then put through filters and then through the clarifiers, and again, further process in terms of letting it settle, getting the solids out. So it's all about the same sort of process.
The process aims at producing clear water which goes into the ponds.
And then that distributes to the ponds where it naturally has its sort of UV control put through, and also the waves and aeration that happens when we get a nice breezy day before it actually goes to the final pumping station and then 3 kilometres out to sea.
I asked Mr. Howes how the plant actually processes the wastewater.
This is where the wastewater actually arrives at the plant. and we have a series of screens to take out some of the solids and the rags and the material. So they go through the screens here, and just in front of us we've actually got the facility where all of the tanker operations come into the plant.
Methane gas is removed, and the water is then screened to remove the sludge.
Right, we've now come through to the first part of the real treatment process, and following the wastewater coming through the screens that we looked at earlier, it comes into these tanks here, where actually the harder or the heavier grit type material settles out quite quickly, and so these tanks are done there. We then decant the wastewater over into our larger primary settlement tanks, and we have 7 of these on this arrangement here, and this allows the other solids to start to settle out, so we can decant off the liquid for further processing. So the solids settle, and then we scrape them out, clean them out, and this has been a real problem for us. This tank here to my right is where the wastewater that's come through the screens that we saw earlier, it comes into this tank here, and we have a series of tanks where it actually settles out the heavier grit-like material, so we can collect that and take it out of the wastewater at a very early stage. The wastewater then actually goes across into our horizontal primary settlement tanks, and you can see quite a number of them here. We have 7 in total, and this has been the real problem for us after the earthquake. A lot of the sand and silt gets through to this point and has been almost filling up these tanks, and you can imagine that's not quite what they're designed to do, and it is very difficult then to get the material back out, so it's quite a slow, mechanical, labour-intensive process. But as you can see, we've actually got them all running again now, so that's really great news. And whilst you can see the solution's still a bit murky, with sand and silt coming through, it's a lot better than what it was.
After the break, women giving their time to knit for those who will be less than warm this winter. Welcome back. Those facing a cold winter are being helped by a group of charitable women.
3 women from Shirley have started a group to knit blankets for those who will be struggling to stay warm this winter.
Well, we belong to a Facebook site called Christchurch Quake Live, and we were just chatting one day about people in need and what the needs were going to be in Christchurch during winter, and came up with this idea to knit blankets and what have you for the people in the eastern suburbs.
The group wants blankets to go where they will be needed most.
Hopefully over Aranui Way, Burwood, Dallington, Brighton. Yep, wherever we find out there's someone who needs, who has no heating and that will need something to keep them warm through winter. We're looking to approach churches and plunk it. We've got some packs for children that we've made up, and cot blankets and things that have been donated, as well as clothing. And we're also in touch with other community groups that are distributing their goods, so we're going to tap into that. But what we're really looking for are the people who are slipping through the cracks, who don't have heating, that do have needs, but nobody's picked up that they need it. The elderly as well, we're going through aged care. We're going to approach them to see if they can help identify people that need it as well. Yeah.
But judging by the amount of wool we're going to be having, we should be able to get at least 400 blankets knitted. We also have full duvet covers and duvet inners as well that we've been given, and sheets. So for those that don't have a washing machine or water cut off and find it hard to do washing, can have the sheets and change them.
The group has had wool donated and are accumulating more and more knitters. They're now aiming to get the majority of blankets done by the 4th of June before the cold weather sets in too much.
We've just had so many donations. We set up a Facebook page and have just put the message out, and people have been so generous. They've donated knitted squares, they're knitting squares for us. People have donated wool. It's just been amazing. People are just so generous. We've even got stuff coming from Australia. They've been, so into it.
So Whittaker's has donated chocolates to go into packs, because we're going to make little warmer packs. So we'll have a chocolate and a message from us, and things like that.
And if you would like to donate, wool or volunteer your time, you can visit the Facebook page Winter Warmers Recycled Blankets for People in Need in Christchurch, or email winterwarmers@hotmail.co.nz.
Well, the search for the biggest pumpkin is on.
Run as a fundraiser for the school that gets bigger every year, just like the pumpkins presented to the judges. Growers on Banks Peninsula and the Christchurch region did their best again this year to grow the biggest and the heaviest for the various classes in the competition.
The first Pumpkin Festival was in 1996.
And have you gone this year?
Considering the weather, I don't think we've gone too badly. The pumpkin's 100 kilos more than last year, so it's obviously a good pumpkin season for growing.
This year's heaviest pumpkin of over 340 kilograms was grown by Vincent Smith of Shirley in Christchurch. He says special pumpkins need special treatment.
Just the seed and a lot of hard work. Just put the blanket on every night and put a wee homemade shack over it and keep the sun off it.
Vincent says after winning 3 years in a row, he might give next year's contest a miss. The current New Zealand record for the biggest pumpkin stands at over 500 kilograms.
6 weeks ago, this was a totally different building. In 6 weeks, CTV has literally grown out of absolutely nothing. So I thought we'd show you around. This is the studio, and we've got the curtains put up today. The curtains are obviously there to enhance the place, but B, also to sort of deaden some of the noise, especially as we're quite close to the road. So studio, borrowed lights at this point, and this will be where the programs such as City Life and Rob's Country and all the other different programs will be coming from. And also in here will be the benches and the set, for the want of a better term, for Susan Sells, which is incidentally going to be on your screen as of the 9th of May. So Susan Sells is back on CTV with Sue Wells, who's terribly excited about the whole thing. So this was literally a storeroom which has been extended out, and as you can see, work is still in progress because we haven't finished as yet, but we will for the 2nd of May launch. If you come with me just for a moment, this is what is going to be the control room. So this will be where the people sit, and they will be operating the cameras, switching the cameras from whichever one they want. The sound, obviously, everything that happens in the studio will come through into here when we get the equipment. The equipment has been really quite a drama because you can't just sort of buy it off a shelf. You actually have to order it and they have to build it and all that sort of thing. And sadly, where we would normally go was hit with a tsunami in Japan. So we lost a fair bit of time with that. But once again, this is all done within 6 weeks, and it is unbelievable. The wiring itself, there are K's and K's of wiring. Believe me, this isn't wireless, this is television. So 2 or 3 people will be sitting in here. They'll be controlling everything, as I said, hence it's called the control room. And then this area here used to be a cafeteria for the mainland press people, and we've sort of quietly taken it over. There's a voice booth in there where obviously voiceovers will be done, and it's become a storeroom because it's still not soundproofed enough. Well, it's soundproof, but it's too echoey because we need something on the wall to deaden the sound. Now, obviously, pictures need to be done, and when you're actually busily, we'll just see who's in here.
No, we're doing a voiceover.
When you come in here, you can actually see what's happening as far as editing is concerned. That's Emily, who's actually sitting there to do a voiceover any moment, so that'll be interesting. So we'll quietly let her finish with that. There's another editing pair in there. Now the nice thing is that we now have a satellite up on the roof, so we can actually start getting satellite feeds from all around the world, which will be part of our programming over the next few while. So work definitely in progress. Everywhere you look, there's somebody doing something and somebody making a mess, but they do clean it up afterwards. So this is going to be where the main signal goes from to the transmitter. So this is called Master Control Room, or MCR for the jargon. And then out through here is where we have lunch. Really, this is the cafeteria and lounge area. This used to be huge. Then CTV came to the mainland press, and they've been very, very good, I must confess. They have been excellent, the mainland press people. They've absorbed us in, and we've become a very large family in so much as the newspaper and the television are now working very close together. I'm Rob Cope-Williams, and that is CTV News.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.